Sigmund Freud spent 40 years studying women, and at the end of his life, he admitted he still didn't understand them. But what he did discover, what he documented, theorized, and what got him labeled dangerous by his own colleagues, was something so uncomfortable, so brutally honest about female desire, that mainstream psychology has spent decades trying to bury it. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too right. Today, we are going to talk about it. We are going to break down Freud's most controversial theory about female psychology, what women truly want at the deepest level, the parts of his work that were suppressed, misunderstood, and deliberately kept from public conversation. And by the end of this video, you will understand something about female desire that most men spend their entire lives completely blind to. Welcome to Mind Tactics Lab, where we go into the psychology that most people are too uncomfortable to discuss openly. Today's topic sits at the intersection of psychoanalysis, evolutionary biology, and raw human desire. We are going to cover Freud's original theories on female psychology, not the watered-down university version, but the real, unfiltered framework he built over 4 decades of clinical work. This is not about putting women down. This is not about manipulation. This is about understanding the deepest architecture of human desire, so you can show up as the kind of man that actually creates it. Stay until the end. The final section is the most important thing in this entire video. Before we get into the theory, we need to understand who Sigmund Freud actually was. Because most people have one of two completely wrong impressions. Either they think he was a genius, whose every word was gospel, or they think he was a fraud whose theories have been completely disproven. Neither is accurate. Freud was a neurologist turned psychoanalyst who spent the late 1800s and early 1900s doing something almost no one in his field was doing. He actually listened to his patients, particularly his female patients, with obsessive clinical attention. And what they told him, what emerged from hundreds of sessions of deep conversation, challenged every comfortable assumption Victorian society had about women. Victorian society believed women were pure, passive, morally elevated creatures who had no strong sexual desires. Women were to be protected, placed on a pedestal, kept away from the corrupting influences of base desire. Freud's patients told him something completely different. They told him about dreams, fantasies, conflicts, and desires that the culture around them insisted they should not have. They told him things that, if made public, would have destroyed reputations and shattered the comfortable mythology of female purity. Freud listened. He documented everything, and then he published it. That is why he was dangerous. Not because he was wrong, but because he refused to look away. So what was the theory? What did Freud actually say that got buried? There were several interconnected ideas, but they all pointed toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. Theory 1, the unconscious is running the show. Freud's most foundational insight was that the vast majority of human behavior, and including desire, attraction, and choice of partner, is driven not by conscious reasoning, but by the unconscious mind. What this means for female desire is devastating in its simplicity. When a woman says she wants a kind, sensitive, emotionally available man, she is describing what her conscious, social mind believes she should want. But the unconscious, which controls the actual feeling of desire, the pull of attraction, the chemistry that either exists or doesn't, operates by completely different rules. The unconscious is not interested in what is good for her. It is not interested in fairness. It is not interested in what society approves of. It is interested in one thing only: signals of power, dominance, and genetic fitness. Freud called this the primary process, raw, instinctual, completely immune to social conditioning. Theory 2. The father complex and the authority archetype. One of Freud's most controversial observations was that female attraction is deeply shaped by early experiences with male authority, specifically the experience of a strong, present, dependable father figure. He documented what he called the father complex, the unconscious template a woman develops for what masculinity looks and feels like, based on her earliest exposure to male energy. This template, formed before she could consciously think about it, becomes the invisible measuring stick she holds every man against for the rest of her life. The man who activates this archetype, who carries himself with quiet authority, who does not seek approval, who holds his frame under pressure, triggers a depth of attraction that has nothing to do with his looks, his income, or his personality traits. It is a felt recognition, a primal signal. Her unconscious says, this is the kind of man who is safe to surrender to. And surrender, Freud argued, is at the very center of what women unconsciously want in a relationship with a man. Not defeat, not weakness, but the ability to finally stop guarding, stop testing, and trust completely. Theory 3. The forbidden desire for masculine strength. This is the part that got Freud in the most trouble, and it is the part that has been most aggressively suppressed in modern psychology. Freud argued, based on his clinical observations, that women have a deep, unconscious attraction to masculine strength that goes far beyond social acceptability. Not aggression, not cruelty, not dominance over others, but self-dominance, inner strength, the capacity to hold absolute stillness under pressure, the refusal to be emotionally destabilized. He observed that women who consciously described wanting gentle, agreeable, accommodating men would consistently report feeling more powerful attraction toward men who were calm, unshakable, and emotionally sovereign. The gap between what women said they wanted and what actually triggered their desire was one of the central observations of Freud's entire career. He called it the wish-fantasy conflict. The conscious wish, gentle and kind. The fantasy, powerful and unbreakable. Now, Freud worked over a century ago. Some of his specific theories have been revised, some have been abandoned, but the core of what he observed about female desire has been confirmed repeatedly by modern research. Studies in evolutionary psychology consistently show that women rate dominance, confidence, and emotional stability among the highest determinants of male attractiveness, often above physical appearance and financial status. Research on attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, building directly on Freudian foundations, shows that the quality of early attachment to a father figure dramatically shapes a woman's adult relationship patterns, the type of man she is drawn to, and the depth of intimacy she is capable of. Neuroscience has confirmed Freud's foundational insight about the unconscious. We now know that approximately 95% of all human decisions, including who we are attracted to, are made in the unconscious mind before conscious awareness ever gets involved. She does not choose to feel attracted to him, she just does. And the reasons exist in a layer of her brain she has no conscious access to. This is not philosophy. This is neuroscience. And Freud, with none of the tools we have today, got the fundamentals right over 100 years ago. That is why his work was dangerous. And that is why it still matters. So what do we actually do with all of this? If Freud was right, if desire is unconscious, if attraction is primal, if the authority archetype is what triggers genuine female want, then what does that mean for how you show up? It means 3 things. 1. Stop trying to be liked. Start being respected. The man who chases approval, who bends to every preference, who softens every opinion, who makes himself smaller to avoid conflict, is the man who destroys attraction while believing he is building it. Freud's framework tells us that approval-seeking reads at the unconscious level as weakness, and weakness is the single most consistent attraction killer in female psychology. Respect, earned through consistency, honesty, and the refusal to compromise your core values, creates the inner experience of the authority archetype. And that is what triggers the unconscious signal she cannot fake and cannot explain. 2. Develop emotional sovereignty. The wish-fantasy conflict Freud identified reveals something precise. What women consciously wish for is gentleness. What they fantasize about, what actually moves the needle of desire, is unshakable emotional strength. Emotional sovereignty does not mean coldness. It does not mean unavailability. It means that your emotional state is governed from the inside, not the outside. It means her mood does not determine your mood. Her withdrawal does not trigger your panic. Her approval does not define your worth. This is the quality Freud's patients described again and again when they talked about the men who had moved them most deeply. Steadiness, presence, gravity. A man who cannot be emotionally moved against his will.
3. Understand the gap between what she says and what she feels. This is perhaps the most practically useful thing in this entire video. Freud spent his career studying the gap between the conscious and the unconscious, the gap between what people said and what they actually felt, the gap between the story and the truth. That gap is real. It is not a character flaw in women. It is a feature of every human being. We are all running on unconscious programming that our conscious mind has limited access to. Understanding this gap means you stop taking her words as the final authority on her desire. You pay attention to what she responds to, what she gravitates toward, what makes her light up, what makes her pull back. You read the signal, not just the statement. Near the end of his life, in letters and private papers that were not published until decades after his death, Freud wrote something that has rarely made it into mainstream discussion. He wrote that the greatest disservice modern civilization had done to both men and women was the suppression of the masculine, not the celebration of cruelty, not the glorification of dominance over others, but the quiet, internal masculine, the capacity for self-governance, for stillness under pressure, for holding a line without apology that he had watched women respond to, search for, and mourn the absence of in partner after partner across 4 decades of clinical observation. What women really want, Freud concluded, is a man who has mastered himself, not a man who has mastered them, not a man who dominates the room, not a man performing confidence like a costume he puts on in the morning, a man who has done the internal work, who knows who he is, who does not need the relationship to tell him his worth, who can be fully present, fully invested, without losing himself in the process. That man, Freud believed, is what every woman's unconscious has been searching for since the first test she ever ran. Let me bring this together. Freud spent 40 years studying what women want, and what emerged from that work, stripped of the jargon, stripped of the controversy, stripped of the Victorian context, was a framework that modern neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and attachment research have all confirmed in different language. The unconscious drives desire. The authority archetype triggers attraction. The wish-fantasy gap is real. And at the deepest level of female psychology, what is wanted is not a perfect man. What is wanted is a complete one. A man who has done the work on himself, who does not need her to feel whole, who can love without losing himself, who can hold without controlling, who can be still when everything around him demands reaction. That man does not need to understand Freud's theory. He already lives it. If this video made you think, subscribe to Mind Tactics Lab. We go deep every week into the psychology behind attraction, human behavior, and the hidden forces that shape every relationship you will ever have. And tell me in the comments, which part of Freud's theory hit closest to home for you? I want to know. I will see you in the next one.